The first salvo in what would become a silent, insidious war against Willow Creek's most vulnerable, arrived not as a shouted ultimatum, but as a stiff, cream-colored envelope official, and vaguely menacing. It lay on Detective David Miller's precinct desk, slipped under his office door, amidst a stack of case files. It bore the embossed, slightly pretentious crest of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. David, a lead investigator with the city's major crimes unit, recognized the sender's implied presence with an instant, familiar weariness that settled upon his broad shoulders. He knew that seal, and he knew with a sinking feeling that tasted like stale coffee and impending conflict the probable architect of any pronouncements it contained, Eleanor Vance, the HOA's self-appointed iron-fisted enforcer of community standards. Just as he picked it up, his office door creaked open, and Eleanor Vance herself stood there, a tight, insincere smile plastered on her face. She was holding a small foil-wrapped plate. "Detective Miller David, if I may be so bold." She began, her voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that immediately set David's internal alarms ringing. "I was just passing by the precinct. Some HOA business with the city planning department, you know how it is. And I thought I'd drop off some of my homemade lemon bars for you and your hard-working team, a little token of appreciation from the community you serve so diligently." David was momentarily stunned by this uncharacteristic display. Mrs. Vance Eleanor. That's unexpected. Thank you." He gestured towards the letter in his hand. "I was just about to open this." Eleanor's eyes flicked to the HOA envelope, then back to his face, her smile faltering for a microsecond before reasserting itself perhaps a shade too brightly. "Oh, that just a minor administrative matter. I'm sure some feedback regarding the pool scheduling. You know how passionate some residents can be about their amenities." She waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing for a busy man like yourself to overly concern himself with right now. Do enjoy the lemon bars. They're my grandmother's recipe." She placed the plate on the corner of his desk, patted his arm, with a familiarity that felt intrusive, and then with a brisk nod departed, leaving a faint, cloying scent of lavender and something unpleasantly artificial in her wake. David stared after her, a profound sense of unease settling over him. This feigned friendliness, this personal delivery of baked goods coupled with the official HOA letter felt like a carefully orchestrated maneuver, a psychological game. He picked up the letter inside, typed in an unforgivingly sharp sans serif font. It was precisely as officious and irritating as he'd braced himself for. It was a formal notification and a matter of urgent concern regarding the Tuesday and Thursday morning hydrotherapy sessions for children and adults with disabilities sessions in which his 12-year-old daughter Emily, a bright spirit undimmed by the cerebral palsy that confined her to a wheelchair on land, was a regular and joyful participant. The letter signed by Eleanor as chairperson of the CCNR Adherence Committee cited multiple substantiated complaints, which David knew were likely Eleanor's own fabrications about the de facto monopolization of the pool. The excessive noise levels, the unsightly and potentially hazardous adaptive equipment, and the institutional atmosphere that supposedly detracted from Willow Creek's resort-like ambiance. It requested David, as a parent and community leader, to advocate for relocating the program to undesirable off-peak hours or an off-site therapeutic facility. Failure to show demonstrable good faith effort within 14 days, it warned, may regrettably necessitate further more formal administrative action, which could include a formal motion to review and potentially curtail or relocate the hydrotherapy program in its entirety. David let the letter fall to his desk, a low, frustrated sigh escaping him. This was Eleanor Vance at her passive-aggressive worst. The hydrotherapy program was a lifeline for Emily and a dozen other families, a source of physical freedom and pure joy. The veiled threat to dismantle it was odious. Eleanor wasn't just a nuisance. She was a bully, deriving a twisted power from tormenting those she perceived as inconvenient. He was still simmering when Sergeant Jim Riley, a solid, dependable detective who'd worked with David for years and adored Emily, poked his head in. "Dave, Mrs. Albright from Willow Creek on line 1, says it's urgent about Eleanor Vance and some incident at the pool this morning." David's jaw tightened. "Put her through." Agnes Albright, a sharp-witted octogenarian and staunch supporter of the hydrotherapy program, didn't mince words. "David, that Eleanor Vance is escalating." She cornered Maria Emily's therapist by the community center rose bushes right after the session ended. Went on a tirade, in front of some of the other parents, about how the special needs contingent was ruining the community, and how able-bodied dues-paying members were being disenfranchised. Maria said Eleanor was practically spitting with rage, her face all contorted. She even suggested the therapy group should consider meeting at that grimy public pool over by the old rendering plant. The nerve. And then, David. "This is the part that truly chilled me to the bone," Maria said, as Eleanor stormed off. She heard her muttering under her breath. Something absolutely vile. Something like, "Some people just don't know when they're not wanted. Drastic measures are sometimes required to restore order and propriety. They'll learn their lesson soon enough." It sounded like a direct threat. David, a real ugly threat. David's blood ran cold, drastic measures. This, coupled with the letter and her bizarre morning visit, painted a deeply disturbing, almost menacing picture. Eleanor wasn't just being an irritant anymore. She was bordering on dangerous. "Thanks for the heads up, Agnes. I appreciate you letting me know immediately. I'll have a serious word with the HOA president about this. This has gone too far." "You do that?" "Dear," Agnes said, her voice tight with concern, "and give Emily an extra hug from me. That child's a precious treasure, and don't let that hateful woman or anyone else ever tell you different." David hung up a profound sense of unease, sharp as a shard of glass, settling deep in his gut. Eleanor Vance was clearly becoming more unhinged, her animosity more overt. He had to do something, but what a vague threat muttered under her breath wasn't enough for police action, not yet. But the warning bells were clanging loud and clear. On this particular sun-drenched Tuesday morning, the Willow Creek Community Pool, its turquoise water sparkling invitingly under the azure sky. The gentle lapping of water against the tiles. A soothing rhythm was for a precious hour, a sanctuary. David watched from the shaded observation deck as Emily, her bright spirit undimmed by her wheelchair, was gently and expertly assisted into the warm, therapeutic water by Maria Rodriguez, her dedicated and beloved aquatic therapist. Emily's face lit up with her customary joyous, unrestrained smile as the buoyant water enveloped her, granting her a freedom of movement she rarely experienced on land. These hydrotherapy sessions were more than just physical therapy. They were her liberation, her joy. "Have a wonderful swim, sweet pea," David called out, blowing her a kiss. "Work hard but have fun. I'll be back to pick you up in exactly 1 hour." "Love you, Daddy," Emily chirped, her voice echoing slightly in the humid air of the indoor pool enclosure, already beginning her gentle warm-up exercises with Maria, her laughter mingling with the happy splashes of the other children in the group. As David turned to leave, a figure suddenly materialized by the pool gate, blocking his path. It was Eleanor Vance. But this was not the scowling, disapproving Eleanor he was accustomed to. Today she was wreathed in an uncharacteristically bright, almost forced, intensely solicitous smile. In her hands, she held a large, cheerful wicker basket laden with colorful, individually wrapped sports drink bottles, a stack of fluffy new towels embroidered with the Willow Creek community logo, and even a plate of what looked like homemade cookies. "Detective Miller David, my dear," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with a synthetic, cloying sweetness that immediately set David's internal alarms ringing at full volume. I was just on my way to a committee meeting, and I thought I'd stop by and bring some little refreshments down for our truly dedicated and inspiring therapy group. Such an inspiration, these precious children, and their wonderful patient therapists working so incredibly hard. It just warms my heart to see such dedication. David was momentarily stunned into bewildered silence. This was a radical, almost terrifying departure from her usual disapproving scowl and thinly veiled hostility. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carefully neutral, though his mind was racing, That's unexpectedly thoughtful of you." "Nonsense, dear boy, pure nonsense." She trilled her eyes, however, holding a strange, almost feverish, unsettling glint that belied her saccharine tone. "It's so vitally important that we support all members of our diverse community. We're all in this together, after all. And I was just thinking, perhaps I could even lend dear Maria a hand today. That complicated hydraulic lift mechanism looks a bit temperamental sometimes, doesn't it? I'm actually quite mechanically inclined, you know? My late husband Arthur always said I had a knack for fixing things." She actually bustled past him, heading directly towards Maria, who looked up from working with Emily, her expression one of polite surprise and guarded apprehension. "Oh, Mrs. Vance, good morning," Maria said, her professional smile firmly in place, though David could see the tension in her shoulders. That's very kind of you, but we have everything well under control as always." "Nonsense, dear. I absolutely insist," Eleanor said, placing the overflowing basket on a nearby poolside table with a flourish. "Many hands make light work, as my dear mother used to say. And it's so very, very important that this vital, expensive equipment functions perfectly and safely for these precious, vulnerable children, isn't it?" She moved towards the lift controls, her smile unwavering, her gaze lingering on Emily, who was now happily splashing and giggling near the edge of the pool, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents of adult tension. A cold, hard knot of profound unease tightened in David's stomach. This was too much, too sudden, too utterly out of character. He felt a desperate, almost physical urge to scoop Emily out of the water immediately to get her as far away from this suddenly, bizarrely benevolent woman as possible. But Eleanor was already chatting effusively with Maria and some of the other parents, pointing at the lift's control panel, asking detailed, seemingly concerned questions about its maintenance schedule. Her demeanor one of solicitous, almost grandmotherly, deeply engaged concern. For over 30 minutes, she stayed circulating, offering drinks, adjusting towels, even helping to steady a child on the ramp. She was the picture of helpfulness, of community spirit. David watched a knot of suspicion warring with a reluctant hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Eleanor was capable of change. He couldn't create a public scene based on a gut feeling, however strong, however persistent. He had a demanding caseload, waiting a deposition he couldn't miss. "I really do have to get to the precinct," David said. Finally, his voice a little hoarse, trying to sound casual. "Emily, sweetie, be good for Maria. Have a wonderful swim. I'll see you very soon." He forced a smile, blew another kiss towards his daughter, who waved back happily, and then with a final appraising, uneasy glance at Eleanor Vance, who was now deeply engrossed in a seemingly earnest conversation with another mother about fundraising for new pool noodles, David walked away, every single instinct he possessed as a seasoned detective screaming at him that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. He made a firm mental note to speak to the HOA president in no uncertain terms about Eleanor's increasingly erratic and deeply unsettling behavior as soon as he got to his office. He had been at his desk for no more than 45 minutes, immersed in the labyrinthine details of a complex financial fraud case, when his personal cell phone shrieked a piercing, insistent sound that shattered his concentration and sent a jolt of pure, ice-cold adrenaline through his veins. It was Central Dispatch. Detective Miller Code 3, Medical Emergency Willow Creek Community Pool, multiple reports, swimmers in distress, possible chemical exposure EMS fire, hazmat en route. Your daughter Emily Miller is reported to be among those affected. The world tilted, then seemed to shatter into a million horrifying pieces. Emily chemical exposure. The words slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He was on his feet before the dispatcher had finished speaking his professional training, kicking in with brutal efficiency, even as a tidal wave of raw, paternal terror threatened to engulf and paralyze him. The drive to Willow Creek, normally a mundane 15-minute commute, felt like an agonizing eternity, a desperate race against an unseen, malevolent clock. He used his emergency lights and siren weaving through traffic with a controlled, focused urgency, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every fiber of his being screamed for impossible speed, yet he forced himself to maintain a degree of professional control, knowing that arriving safely and able to function was paramount. As he skidded to a halt in front of the community center, the scene that greeted him was one of controlled, nightmarish chaos. Multiple ambulances, fire trucks, and police cruisers already thronged the entrance, their emergency lights painting frantic, strobing, disorienting patterns of red and blue on the surrounding buildings and the pale, shocked faces of onlookers. Paramedics were rushing towards the pool area with gurneys, oxygen tanks, and emergency decontamination kits. He could hear shouts, cries of pain, and the authoritative clipped commands of first responders trying to impose order on an unfolding disaster. David slammed his car into park, his badge already clipped to his belt, and sprinted towards the pool enclosure. His lungs burning his mind, a maelstrom of horrifying, unspeakable possibilities. The air was thick, cloying, with a strange, sharp, acrid odor, a chemical tang that burned his nostrils, stung his eyes, and made his throat constrict. He burst through the gates into the pool area and stopped dead. The scene before him, a living, breathing nightmare made real. Several children and adults were being helped or dragged out of the turquoise water, their skin an angry, inflamed, terrifying red, some coughing violently, uncontrollably, others crying out in agony, clawing at their burning eyes and skin. Maria Emily's therapist was among them, her face contorted in distress and pain as she tried to soothe a small boy who was screaming hysterically, his small hands covering his face. And then he saw Emily. She was being gently, urgently lifted onto a gurney by two grim-faced paramedics, her small, frail body trembling uncontrollably, her face pale waxen and etched with an unimaginable pain and profound, bewildered fear. Her normally bright, expressive eyes were squeezed tightly shut, tears streaming unheeded down her flushed, reddened cheeks. Large, angry patches of her delicate skin, where the poisoned water had clung, were visibly reddened and looked almost blistered, as if scalded. "Emily." David choked out his voice, a raw, ragged sound rushing to her side, his detective's carefully constructed composure momentarily completely shattering into a million pieces. Daddy!" She whimpered, her voice weak, thready, almost unrecognizable, raspy with pain and chemical irritation. "It burns, Daddy. My skin, my eyes. It burns so much. I know, sweetie, I know help is here. You're going to be okay. Daddy's here." He murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears, his hand reaching out to touch her, then recoiling slightly, afraid of causing her more pain, even as his mind, the detective part of him, the part that never slept, was already racing, assessing, analyzing, cataloging. This was no accident. This was not a simple chlorine imbalance. The acrid smell, the speed and severity of the skin reactions, the sheer number of victims. This was a deliberate, malicious chemical assault. A paramedic, a young woman with kind but strained eyes, looked up at him, her expression grave. "Detective Miller, we need to transport her immediately. Severe chemical burns possible, significant respiratory irritation. We don't know for certain what they were exposed to yet, but it's nasty, highly corrosive, every second counts. Go get her out of here, David urged, forcing himself to step back to let them work, though it tore at every fiber of his being to let Emily out of his sight, to entrust her to others. However skilled, he watched them rush her towards a waiting ambulance, its doors already open, then turned his attention back to the unfolding crisis. His profound personal anguish now fueling a cold, sharp, methodical, professional rage. He spotted Captain Henderson, the fire department's experienced hazmat team leader, directing operations near the pool's edge, his bulky yellow suit making him an unmistakable figure in the chaos. "Henderson, what in God's name have we got here?" David yelled over the din of sirens, shouts, and crying. "Captain Henderson." A grizzled, unflappable veteran turned his faceplate, momentarily obscuring his expression. "Miller, nasty, ugly situation. Looks like some kind of highly concentrated corrosive agent was introduced directly into the pool. We're getting dangerously acidic pH readings across the board. Multiple victims with significant chemical burns, mostly superficial to second degree, from what we can assess visually so far. But we need to decontaminate everyone immediately and try to identify the specific substance ASAP. This wasn't accidental contamination, David. This was deliberate, and it was a massive dose. How many victims confirmed so far? David asked, his voice tight, his mind already sifting through possibilities. At least a dozen, possibly more. Mostly the hydrotherapy group. It seems they were the first ones in the water. This morning, the most exposed Henderson's eyes visible now behind his faceplate met David's, and there was a grim, unspoken understanding there. This wasn't random. This was targeted. David's gaze swept the chaotic, nightmarish scene. His uniformed officers were establishing a wider perimeter, trying to control the growing, anxious crowd of onlookers and frantic parents who were beginning to arrive. His detective's mind cold and analytical, despite the inferno of fear in his gut, began to click rapidly through possibilities, motives, suspects, and one name, one face, one cloying artificial smile immediately sickeningly leaped to the forefront of his thoughts. Eleanor Vance. Her documented vitriol, her obsessive vendetta against the therapy group, her chilling muttered threats reported by Agnes Albright, her bizarre feigned friendliness just hours before. It all coalesced with horrifying, undeniable clarity into a monstrously plausible scenario. Near the pool's main service entrance, half hidden behind a large decorative potted palm tree that hadn't been there when David had dropped Emily off earlier, his eye caught something. A dark, heavy-duty plastic jerry can about 5 gallons in size, its cap lying beside it on the concrete. A faint, telltale shimmer of liquid still visible around its base, and a single distinctive surgical-type glove lying discarded nearby. His mind flashed to Carlos Rodriguez, the community center's longtime maintenance supervisor, a quiet, reliable man who'd always been unfailingly kind and helpful to Emily and the other therapy participants. Could Carlos have been this careless, this negligent? It seemed utterly out of character. Or was this something more sinister, something deliberately planted to mislead, to deflect suspicion? He signaled one of the first responding forensics officers. "Bag that jerry can, and the glove very carefully preserve any possible prints or trace evidence. Check the surrounding area meticulously for footprints, drag marks, anything out of place." As more victims were being carefully decontaminated by hazmat crews, their agonized cries a terrible soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy, Maria Rodriguez, Emily's therapist. Her own face flushed an angry red, and already beginning to blister, her eyes filled with a mixture of unbearable pain and incandescent fury, grabbed David's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Detective Miller!" She gasped, her voice choked, coughing violently. "Eleanor Vance, she was here just before it happened. Right here." She was being so nice, so helpful, offering drinks, fussing with the lift, chatting with the parents for almost the whole session. Then, just as everyone was getting comfortable in the water, she said she needed to check something in the pump room. And then I heard her muttering as she walked quickly away from the pool area just seconds before the screaming started, before the burning. She said, "Detective, I swear I heard her say it clear as day." She said, "They finally got what they deserve for taking our pool. The little nuisances let them cry to their precious mommies. Now, maybe my Daniel would still be here if someone had cared about his suffering. It didn't make any sense then, but now." Maria's voice trailed off, her eyes wide with dawning, horrified comprehension. Daniel who was Daniel Eleanor, the prolonged, elaborate charade of kindness, the offer to help with the lift, her presence at the pool for the entire session, her sudden departure towards the pump room, and now this chilling, cryptic, hate-filled utterance. It all coalesced into a horrifying, damning, almost undeniable picture. The jerry can. Was it a clumsy attempt to frame someone else like Carlos? Or had Eleanor, in her agitated state, simply been that brazen, that arrogant, that careless? Secure this entire area as an active crime scene. Henderson David commanded his voice, now like chips of Arctic ice, devoid of all emotion, but a chillingly calm, focused authority. "Nothing in or out without my express authorization. I want samples of the pool water from multiple depths and locations. I want samples from the filtration system, from the pump room, from that jerry can. I want every inch of this place, photographed, sketched, and processed. We are not just dealing with an accidental contamination here. People." This was a deliberate, calculated chemical assault. Henderson nodded grimly. "My thoughts exactly, Miller. Will get you everything you need." David turned to Sergeant Jim Riley, who had just arrived, his normally jovial face grim and set. "Jim," David said, his voice low and tense, "I want a dedicated unit dispatched immediately to Eleanor Vance's residence. She lives at 12 Oakhaven Drive. I don't want her approached or alerted directly, yet not until we have more than Maria's overheard statement, and that Jerry can. But I want tight, discreet surveillance. I want to know her movements, who she talks to if she tries to leave. She has demonstrated a long-standing, escalating animosity towards this therapy group. And Jim," David added, his voice dropping further, a dangerous, almost feral edge creeping in, "get a priority request to the lab to run that partial latent print from the jerry can against Vance's known prints on file from her HOA board application, and run her financials for any large, recent, unusual chemical purchases. That jerrycan needs to be traced and fast." Riley, who knew Emily well, who had often brought her small, thoughtful, police-themed toys and attended her school events, nodded, his own face a mask of grim determination. "Emily loved that little K9 plushie I gave her last Christmas. Dave," he said, his voice uncharacteristically rough. "She called him Sarge. We'll get this bitch. Dave, we'll get her. Shundrum." The initial forensic report from the lab came back with astonishing speed. The jerrycan contained significant residue of industrial-grade sulfuric acid, the same type of highly corrosive agent that had contaminated the pool, and the partial latent print lifted from the handle of the jerrycan, a clear, positive, undeniable match to Eleanor G. Vance. The next few hours were a maelstrom of hospital visits, anxious waiting, and rapidly unfolding investigative updates. Emily blessedly was in pain, but stable, her burns severe. But thanks to the quick decontamination and medical intervention, not deemed life-threatening, the other children and adults were also being treated, their conditions ranging from minor irritation to serious second-degree burns. The hardware store canvas, expedited by Riley's furious energy, yielded pure gold. A small independent industrial supplier on the city outskirts, Henderson's Hardware and Chemical, no relation to the fire captain, a fact that caused a moment of grim irony, reported a woman matching Eleanor's precise description, purchasing 10 one-gallon containers of concentrated sulfuric acid, drain cleaner, just 2 days prior, She'd paid cash, seemed agitated and furtive, and had specifically asked for the strongest stuff they had for a very stubborn, very large blockage at her extensive property. The owner, a meticulous elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who it turned out was Agnes Albright's brother-in-law, a connection that would prove invaluable, had thought her explanation odd and her demeanor suspicious. He hadn't gotten her license plate, but he had security camera footage of her at the counter clear as day, and he had the carbon copy of the cash sales receipt itemizing the purchase. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, the fingerprint match, the positive ID from the chemical supplier, the damning overheard statement from Maria, and Eleanor's well-documented history of animosity, David Miller and Assistant District Attorney Ben Carter secured an emergency no-knock search warrant for Eleanor Vance's residence. The raid on Eleanor's meticulously neat, obsessively ordered home yielded a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. In her locked garage, hidden behind a stack of old newspapers and bags of lawn fertilizer, detectives found 9 sealed 1-gallon containers of the exact same brand of industrial-strength sulfuric acid drain cleaner purchased from Henderson's Hardware and Chemical. One container was conspicuously, damningly empty. In her home office, a forensic sweep of her personal computer's hard drive, conducted by a digital forensics expert, uncovered a recently deleted file in the recycle bin. A file whose name was chillingly clear: Willow Creek Pool Acid Dosage Calculations, Final X = X. Her browser history from the preceding days showed numerous specific searches for how to disable commercial pool filtration systems, safe handling of concentrated sulfuric acid, effects of sulfuric acid on human skin, chemical burns treatment, and most damningly undetectable poisons for swimming pools, and how to commit murder and get away with it. Weepom. In the stark, sterile interrogation room at police headquarters, Eleanor Vance initially feigned shocked outrage, then attempted to blame the pool maintenance man, Carlos Rodriguez, suggesting he was disgruntled over a recent pay dispute, or perhaps just dangerously incompetent. She even bizarrely tried to insinuate that one of the parents from the therapy group might have sabotaged the pool to garner sympathy or sue the HOA. But when confronted with the overwhelming, irrefutable, meticulously assembled evidence, the store purchase confirmation, her license plate captured by a neighboring business's camera as she left Henderson's, her fingerprints on the jerry can found discarded at the scene, the 9 remaining containers of acid in her garage, and the damning, deeply disturbing contents of her computer files. Her carefully constructed facade of aggrieved respectability finally spectacularly shattered. "All right, yes, damn you, I did it!" She finally shrieked, her face contorted with a rage so profound, so hateful, it was terrifying in its intensity. Those cripples, those defectives, they were an eyesore, an abomination. They ruined everything. Our beautiful, pristine pool, our peaceful, exclusive community turned into a damned freak show with their ugly ramps and their noisy splashing. They didn't belong here. They should have been kept hidden away out of sight, like who was Mrs. Vance? Detective Harding, the lead interrogator, asked, his voice quiet, almost gentle, but relentlessly probing. "Who are you talking about?" Eleanor's face crumpled, the rage momentarily replaced by a flash of raw, unbearable pain, a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "My son," she whispered, the words torn from her, ragged and broken. "My Daniel. He was like them. Not right, sickly. He needed so much special schools, special doctors, special everything. He died when he was just 8 years old, 30 years ago, and no one cared. No one helped. We were alone. They all looked away. And now these people, they get everything. Special treatment, special pool times, everyone fawning over them, feeling sorry for them. It's not fair. It was never fair. They get to live, to laugh, to be loved. While my Daniel is gone. I I just wanted to make them feel some of the pain, some of the ugliness, some of the rejection that we felt. I wanted to scare them off, to make them understand they weren't welcome, that their presence was a constant, painful reminder of everything I lost, everything that was taken from me. Her confession, a torrent of long-suppressed grief, rage, envy, and profound, unprocessed trauma poured out of her, chillingly illuminating the twisted, tragic genesis of her monstrous act. It wasn't just about HOA rules or aesthetic sensibilities. It was about a mother's broken heart, a grief that had curdled over decades into a consuming, irrational, and ultimately murderous hatred. The trial was swift, the evidence irrefutable. Victim impact statements from the parents and from a recovering but still scarred Emily Miller, delivered via a secure video link from a child advocacy center, were heartbreaking. Eleanor Vance, pale and hollow-eyed, offered no defense, her lawyer advising her to plead guilty to lesser charges, which the DA, given the strength of the case and the horrific nature of the crime, flatly refused. Testifying against her lawyer's advice, Eleanor only further damned herself with rambling, incoherent diatribes filled with self-pity and a chilling lack of genuine remorse for her victims, focusing instead on her own perceived victimhood. Agnes Albright and Maria Rodriguez both provided compelling testimony about Eleanor's escalating hostility and her specific ominous threats. Leading up to the attack, Eleanor Vance was found guilty on all counts, including multiple charges of aggravated assault with a chemical agent causing great bodily harm and domestic chemical terrorism. The judge, visibly appalled by the calculated cruelty and the profound, lasting harm inflicted, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, explicitly stating that her actions constituted an abomination against humanity and a profound betrayal of community trust. She also ordered the forfeiture of all of Eleanor Vance's substantial assets, including her Willow Creek home, to establish a multi-million-dollar restitution and long-term care fund for the victims and their families, ensuring they would have access to lifelong medical treatment therapy and any necessary adaptive support for the devastating injuries and trauma she had so callously, so hatefully inflicted. Months later, Emily Miller, bearing faint silvery scars on her arms and legs, but her bright, indomitable spirit, undimmed, returned to the newly reopened, extensively renovated, and now even more welcoming Willow Creek Community Pool for a special Welcome Back and Healing hydrotherapy session. David watched from the side, his heart swelling with a mixture of profound pride, deep gratitude, and a lingering, sorrowful ache. The community had rallied around the victims with extraordinary compassion and support, installing state-of-the-art water quality monitoring systems, enhanced security measures, and a new, far more inclusive and empathetic HOA board. Emily still had moments of understandable fear, especially when the water felt too cold or smelled too strongly of chlorine, a stark sensory reminder of that terrible day. She was in ongoing therapy to process the trauma, as were many of the other children. David, too, wrestled with the what-ifs, the horrifying knowledge of how close he'd come to losing his precious daughter. He had faced a brief, though professionally uncomfortable, internal departmental review regarding his initial fleeting suspicion of Carlos Rodriguez when the jerry can was first discovered, a suspicion quickly dispelled by evidence and Eleanor's own actions. But his overall handling of the complex, deeply personal investigation was ultimately commended as exemplary. His colleagues, particularly Jim Riley, who now made a point of attending Emily's school events and bringing her silly K-9-themed gifts, had been a rock of unwavering support. One quiet evening, weeks after the sentencing, as Emily was recounting her day at the pool, her laughter echoing through their home, a sound more precious to David than any symphony, he found himself thinking of Eleanor Vance, alone in her prison cell, facing a lifetime of barren regret. He felt no forgiveness. Not yet, perhaps never. But he found himself drafting a letter a letter he knew he would never actually send in it. He didn't offer platitudes or absolution. Instead, he wrote about Emily's courage, about the resilience of the other children, about the enduring power of community and compassion. He wrote about his own son, Daniel, the one he had lost, not to illness, but to a different kind of tragedy. The tragedy of a heart consumed by bitterness, a soul lost to hate. He wrote of a profound, sorrowful hope that perhaps someday, somehow, even in the darkest of places, Eleanor Vance might begin to confront the enormity of her own pain, not as an excuse for her cruelty, but as a first agonizing step towards understanding the sanctity of the lives she had so carelessly, so hatefully tried to destroy. "Daddy," Emily said later that night, looking at the faint pink marks that still traced a delicate pattern on her arm. "Will the scars ever go away completely?" David pulled her close, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. "Maybe not completely, sweet pea," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Some scars, the ones on the outside and the ones on the inside, they stay with us. They become a part of our story. But they're not the whole story, Emily. They're a reminder of how brave you are, how strong you are, how much you overcame. And they show everyone that even when truly terrible things happen, even when people are consumed by a terrible cruelty, we can heal. We can find joy again. We can keep swimming." Willow Creek, too, was healing its waters once again, a place of laughter, of therapy, of sanctuary, a vibrant testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable malice. It was a community that had stared into the abyss of human cruelty and chosen defiantly, compassionately to embrace the light, to reaffirm its commitment to protecting its most vulnerable, and to remember always the precious, unassailable right of every child to simply joyfully be,